going to have two speakers today, student speaker later on, and our first speaker is Vice Chancellor Philip Lyons. He's going to be talking about what the university is anticipating with some of the changes in their current form. Please welcome Vice Chancellor Lyons.
I know some of you, thank you for sitting up in the front. And with a group this size, I really hope we can be conversational. So, you know, anytime along the line, please interrupt me, ask questions. This is the first time I've given the presentation, or this particular presentation. I have no idea how long it is, but I'm going to keep my eye on the clock. As Liz said, really, I want to go over the governor's budget. I want to dispel some rumors or some myths about that reduction. I want to talk about the dollars and what percentage that reduction is. I want to talk about the impact of declining state support of higher education in general. And then I want to talk specifically and go through some of the specific changes that are proposed within the governor's budget. And I've got about 6 areas that I kind of like to highlight. So the first thing I want to do is I want to ask you a little. I want to give you a little quiz. And the quiz is: what is the overall percentage of the governor's proposed cut of $300 million to the UW system? UWS in this presentation means UW system. The UW system budget. Is it 2.5%? Is it 6.25%? Is it 13%? Or is it 16.4%? Is it all of the above or none of the above? 13%? All of the above. Ding, ding, ding. This is all of the above. All of the above? How can it be all of the above? Well, this underlies one of the most confusing things about this budget. What is the reduction? I hear legislators saying 2.5%. It's only 2.5% of $6 billion UW system budget. That's correct. 6.25%. 6.25% of the dollars. Well, let's go and take a look at this chart. So I'm going to bring dollars in and out to show you how those percentages equate and how they're all accurate. This top number is all funds, and I want to talk about the colors first. GPR, that is state support. That's general purpose revenue. That's the dollars that the state of Wisconsin gives to the UW system to be able to do their operations. And so we're going to keep that constant through all of the areas. Tuition is what the university used to have the ability to raise to be able to really offset the ongoing reductions every year until it was frozen a couple of years ago. Again, that's one of the things and one of the revenue streams that the university really has control over, and so we're going to keep that static through everything. This kind of yellowish green area is an area called auxiliary operations. And for some of the students here, that would be your seg fee accounts. It would also be, in this particular scenario, would also include 136 money. So it's the laptop account, it's housing money, it's dining money, it's things that are outside of state support and tuition. Gifts and contracts in the purple is contracts that we have with the National Science Foundation. It's federal contracts. It's contracts that you have with businesses. And essentially, those contracts are for a specific purpose. They're paying the institution, usually and primarily for research, but it is dollars that are generated in revenue that are really outside sometimes the true nature or mission of the institution as a teaching institution. A lot of dollars in contracts for Madison. It also includes gifts. So if you were going to give a gift to the University of Wisconsin-Stout, it might go to the foundation, but then once it's brought in and used in in some manner and in an expenditure, it would be included in this operating budget. And then finally, this big light blue is a very important aspect for when you hear the $6 billion number. And I'm going to start to remove things to get down to the bottom. That blue number of federal, and you can see that this is $6 billion, this is $4 billion, and this is $2 billion. That blue amount is almost $2 billion in and of itself. That includes Pell Grants, Stafford loans, Perkins loans, many of the federal grants and aid, college work study, all of those federally funded and state funded financial aid awards. Now, you know that the financial aid that you receive isn't the university's until you pay your tuition. So it's awarded to the university. It covers your tuition. And then if there's an overage, we send it back to you. So in some cases, this gets double counted. Because when it comes into the university as a receivable, it's counted in the $6 billion budget of the operating. Then you take that money and you pay your tuition. So it's given to you here, and then you pay it here. So in some cases, the $6 billion is counted twice in the overall operating budget. This federal money, although in an accounting perspective, is counted as a portion of our operating budget, it's not our money. It's students' money to be able to pay for the cost of attendance. So we remove that money because as the state reduces our budget, we can't reduce financial aid as a portion of that. And so we get to a little bit over $4 million. So when 3M decides to contract with our STEM department to do some research on a new product that they're designing and they're paying UW-System, that's an agreement, a business contract between 3M and uw-stout. That's included in the gifts and contracts. If Mary McManus decides to give us a whole bunch of money, that is not...
I'm doing it.
I can send you an invoice right now.
Gotta wait till I win the lottery.
All right.
You'll get the email.
But Mary's money should not be counted in our overall operating budget, so we strip that out. You know what else shouldn't be brought into that operating budget is auxiliary operations, because when you're paying for housing, there's no state support and there's no tuition that goes to the housing bill. You pay housing to live in that particular room. You pay housing to eat meals in the residence hall or in the dining facility, and that's so you don't have to pay for the living experiences that you are getting. So you support them, you do not, but it is not a portion of the cut that the state is appropriating to us. If I took for the UW system the $300 million and took it against the $6.1 billion, I get 2.5%. If I take it against taking out the federal financial aid and the gifts and contracts, I get something that looks more like 6.25%. If I take out everything except tuition and fees, which is really what the university has the ability to control over, it's 13%. Now, to drill down even further, let's take that $2.4 billion, which I'm going to call flexible funding, and that's the 6.5% or 6.2% proposed GPR cut. But remember that the state is only cutting their total GPR. So the state didn't cut tuition. They cut the appropriation that the state gave us. So there's a great article out there that quotes Todd Berry, and Todd Berry's with the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. It's under PolitiFact. And he reaffirms from the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance that the true cut is 13%. But I also would let you know that within this GPR, there's debt service. So the state of Wisconsin, in one of the last slides I have in this presentation, I talk about the capital building program, which of the things that are in the governor's budget is the thing that is flying under the radar the most, and is huge. No one's talking about it, but it is a huge issue, this capital building project, and what is not in that. When the state builds Harvey Hall, $20 million, we don't pay $20 million this year to have that building. We pay $20 million over 20 years. And what the state funds is they fund the debt service or the mortgage on that building. So 4.5% of 20 million is what the state puts into our budget. We have no ability to move that money anywhere else. It is locked down to pay for the expenses that are associated with Harvey Hall. So when the state reduces our support, it is reflected within GPR, but we can't do anything about it. And if you take that restricted money for GPR out of this as well, system-wide, it is a 16.4% reduction. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit how it's not 16.4% at Stout, because even within the UW system, the numbers are all different. So Superior is funded at a different level than Whitewater, is funded at a different level than Madison, that's funded at a different level than Stout. This is the collective across all institutions at the UW. So even though all of these percentages are right, I can show you percentages for UW-Stout that are even different than this, which makes it even more complicated. So I want to talk a little bit about Stout's numbers. And here's some of Stout's big numbers. Stout has, if you want to equate the $6 billion budget, Stout has about a $204 million budget. And like that blue area, that is financial aid directed, that is your money and not really our money, but it's also sometimes double counted. That is 64 million of the 205 that makes up the full budget. So 64 million of the 205 million is really not even our money to be able to count as a part of our operating budget, because it really is paying for tuition. Our tuition, and I'm putting $58 million up there. So really that number in money that is spent, that is paid for in tuition by students that attend on campus is more along the lines of about 47 or 48 million. This includes distance education, or what's referred to on our campus as customized instruction. And we got authority from the Board of Regents, and I'm not going to go too far into the weeds on this, but when we price distance education, we price it to market. We don't price it within what the constrictions and regulations are within the state of Wisconsin, because we're not competing in a regional area. We're competing really globally in distance ed. But that amount is also not included in seg fees. So it's a whole different way of pricing tuition, and we have both of those things on campus right now. That number in and of itself is about $10 million now, so it's a big number. I've included this on the operating budget, but I'm going to back that out a little bit later. But it is money that we have some ability, it's fungible. I would call it fungible. It pays for faculty instruction, it pays for overhead assessments, it pays for a whole number of things, even on the campus, with the exception of the student center and some things that are campus specific. So I included in tuition here. Auxiliaries, $30 million, housing, dining, food service, seg fees, recreational facilities, gifts, grants, and contracts, $9 million. In this particular number, I brought in the $136, so gifts, grants, and contracts, I do have the laptop fees brought in there to make the auxiliaries kind of, most people know that the auxiliary dollars are about $30 million. Other debt service is 18, and research is $750,000. So this is our number. If you can see next to state support, UW-Stout's budget cut number is $6.1 million. So I've just told you that in general, if you wound up or you tied up the entire system-wide number, it's about 13%. And if you even back out some of the debt service, which this does, it's more like 16%. Well, our state support right now, and the debt service is backed out on this, is 25 million, and our cut is 6.1. So this number at Stout is even much bigger as a percentage of all of our 102. And that's just tuition and fees and not distance. It's more like 8.5%. So even Stout's numbers are more significant than what the UW system summary is. And this is for those of you that like pie charts, this is I have a laminated wallet size of this. I have this slide in a lot of my presentations. It shows how our budget breaks out. It shows you that tuition is the biggest part of our budget. It is it's almost 40% of our budget, while state support with not GPR is more like 14%. And one of the things that I wanted to really talk about is these GPR, debt, minority, and utility. Those are general purpose revenues that the state gives us that we can't spend in any other place than what it's given to us for. So utilities, the things that keep the lights on, the heat, our water, it is granted centrally to UW system. We spend it, and at the end of the year, they pay our bill. We get that money, we receive that money, but we cannot spend it on anything else than the utility costs that are covered. So there are still some areas that we receive money from the state, but we can't spend it in other areas. And one of the reasons why I thought this was important. Now, you probably, I hope you can read this, because what this chart does is it shows the differences within the UW system of the percentage of state support that we receive or they receive, as opposed to their GPR tuition. This is tuition and GPR collectively. This is breaking out state support, bringing in tuition. So I'm going to talk to UW-Stout. We have $70 million. That is a combination of the $24 million we get from the state and the $46 million that we get from on-campus tuitions. That adds up to $70 million. And what UW system did is they broke that out as what is your percentage of state support when it's compared against tuition. And Stout is about 34%. That ranks fourth within the comprehensive institutions, which is good, but at 34%, there's a lot of institutions that are right at that 30% level. So if you go up to Eau Claire, 32, Green Bay, 34, La Crosse, 29, Oshkosh, 33, Parkside, a small campus, 43%, pretty high. Platteville, 34, River Falls, 31, I skipped somebody. Superior, very high, small campus, 54, with Whitewater at 18%. So this gives a breakdown of what your subsidy would be at this campus. What is the subsidy for going to the University of Wisconsin-Stout from the state? What is it that they pay for your tuition? The answer to that is right here across all these institutions at $3,138. That is the appropriation per full-time equivalent or full-time student. As you can see, these numbers range from 1,492 to 7,197. 1,500 at Whitewater, 7,000 at Superior. Why is that? Well, Superior has dropped enrollment over the course of many years. As they've dropped enrollment, the state has come in and they have helped support their overall budget. So as their tuition revenue declines, the state comes in, makes whole their budget, and their support goes up. At Whitewater, I've heard it described to me as Whitewater pulled a lot of out-of-state students. What do we know about out-of-state students? You pay $9,000 to come here. Out-of-state students pay $16,000 to come here. For every out-of-state student that you have, you need 2 in-state students. And so as Whitewater became very heavily dependent on these out-of-state students, their state support declined. The number I want you to remember on here is the 3,138, because I'm going to talk about, yeah.
For that number, full-time equivalent, since we are per credit, is that based on 15 credits, or what does that number come from?
That takes our overall enrollment of 7,700, and it divides it into the overall support that we're getting of 24 million. So that's what that is. Here's the FTE of 7,710. If we divide that into the GPR number of 24, we should get that.
So that's how many we reported as full-time. Okay.
Yep. So Superior's number, 2,115. If we divide that into the 15, Superior's GPR support of 15 million isn't too far from Whitewater's of 16 million. So you see where the disparity is. This is systems it's interesting because this Excel sheet goes back about 6 years. So you can actually click on it and see the different changes of what was brought in and taken out when it comes to support for tuition and fees. All right, so sorry this is small, but what this chart is net tuition as a percentage. So tuition as a percentage of public higher education revenue. All right, and this gives you a U.S. mean of 47%. So on average, at public institutions of higher education, most of the subsidies are 47%. Here's the numbers in Wisconsin. 18, 54, 31, 33, 34, 43, 33, 29, 43, 34, 32. So I'm showing you here that at 30% of net tuition, and this goes from about 13% all the way up to 85% as net revenue. Did I read revenue or did I read support? I think I did support. So a percentage of our tuition, I should have read this number, I'm sorry. Usually in the 60 to 70% with Whitewater at 81. If I go and look here, this is where Wisconsin is. So Wisconsin is, on this chart, an institution that is showing, and this chart comes from the Higher Education Executive Officers. It is a collection of revenue charts and data that gives you national means. You look at this chart and you kind of scratch your head and say, well, that's odd because Wisconsin, if I average what I know the UWs are getting, we should be around here. Because our average of tuition that you're all paying is not in the 40s, it's more in like 60 to 65 percentile. And I figured out what we have going on here. It's an issue with the tech colleges being brought in to the funding on this as well. So what we have is all public higher ed, which includes property taxes that are directed to the tech colleges, that are bringing our number actually down below the mean. But where we ought to be, and I showed you those percentages, is right around here. And it's interesting, these ones that are really high are Vermont, New Hampshire, Delaware, Rhode Island. Those are states with a very low tax base. And so you've got these smaller states charging a higher percentage of revenue. They don't really have the base to support it.
So along with the tech colleges, it also includes the two-year schools and UW-stout?
Yes. Now, they were even on my chart.
Right. Yeah, you just have the 13.
System, when they put this together, separated out. They wanted to compare like institutions. So up at the top, you'll see that Madison and Milwaukee are 39 and 38% supported, state supported, and at Milwaukee and Madison, you're paying about 60%. In the colleges, you're paying about the same, it's 40-60. So 60% support would put us right about, Minnesota, Iowa, right in there. Maybe a little bit past. All right, so now this chart is the educational appropriations per FTE. And this is why I wanted you to remember that, that number of 3,800. So where we land on this is actually, we have another tech college, we're way up here. So as a percentage of what state appropriations are per FTE, this makes it look like we're funded pretty well. But here is the breakout of the national data that shows essentially that educational appropriations per FTE are about $6,100 across the country, compared to the $3,000 at University of Wisconsin-Stout. And what you're going to see here as well is this green number of 2,685 back in 1988, now growing to $5,475 ex tuition. And so essentially what has occurred over a very long period of time, I got a number of slides that I'm going to run through very quickly, is that as state support has declined, universities have raised tuition to cover declining state support. We know that, but it never ceases to amaze me. I ended up being invited to a presentation that was kind of a strategic planning thing that was being done by Senator Ron Johnson. So he put this up, and he drew the conclusion that as a percentage of inflation, in 1988, inflation has gone from $3,600 to $7,000. So it's essentially inflation from 88 to 2012 is double. The cost of college education is $4,600, and now the actual cost, and this is the cost of attendance, so it's not just necessarily tuition, and this is for your public schools. This is undergraduate fees, room, board, and four-year public college. This is the cost of going to school in its totality. And the conclusion that was drawn from this is that colleges are out of control of the pricing. Well, not necessarily, and I talked to him, and I talked to Boland after. You're not bringing in a whole number of issues that aren't being discussed in this, including tuition discounting, including the lack of state support, including a whole number of things that this kind of masks. This is too simple. You can't just compare a cost of college versus inflation as a one standalone comparison. This chart, however, is shocking. And this shows that college costs up 1,000% versus the consumer price index of 280%, and medical care at 600% is growing at a rate that is double and triple those others. And probably the most concerning one is that credit card debt. And I think that a few things about that credit card debt. So it's up to $1.1 trillion. Like Harvey Hall cost $20 million. We didn't pay for that building this year. So my wife went to college. She got a bachelor's degree. She got a master's degree. She took out about $15,000 in loans, and she paid for them over 10 years. Well, the cost of student debt is elongated. So my wife, up until about here, was a part of this chart, even though she hadn't gone to school for many, many years. So this is a cumulative effect. It's shocking, but it's a cumulative effect. This slide was done by the Educational Advisory Board, and I have a couple other things that I want to bring into the conversation, primarily because when I hear about the capping of tuition, which I'm going to get into, it's always an affordability issue. Affordability. And these two things show the affordability issue. But so does this. Let's put tuition into perspective. So, if I take 6%, 30%, and 16%, I get well over half. This is the cost of education. 6%, four-year public institution under 6,000. 6,000 to 9,000, we're in that category. 30% of the population gets an education in this price range. And 9,000 to 12,000, another 16%. Add on the 10%, and that's 12 to 15,000. You go all the way to here, only 18% of students that attend higher education go there with a list price above $30,000. And then, most articles that you hear about in the media, they only focus on the $45,000 and over, and usually they find the person that has not found a job, that has left college with $200,000, and you extrapolate to the entire population that people are going to school getting a $200,000 deficit or student loan debt, and then they can't find a job. So this is just to put things into perspective. Half of the students that get a degree get so fairly reasonable. And the better question is whether or not there's a good return of investment. And this only looks at tuition, not tuition, room and board, and all of it. Is there a good cost of return of investment of a $9,000 college degree to earn potentially $40,000 to $50,000, which is normally the starting wage of a college graduate, versus not going to college? The outliers. The press focuses on the small number of students with large debt, and the actual average of student debt is about $29,000. The news story average is about $85,000. Here is a quick slide about what net tuition has done since 1988. Net tuition used to be about $24,000. It has risen to up just south of 50%. Another slide that just gives you an indication of the rising cost, but here is the offsetting. This is uw-stout, and the tuition's been fairly flat, and the support of higher education for stout at about 41% in 1997 to the teens. And you can actually look at this chart and you can see that we went from the 40 percentile to the 30s, which we had about 5 years, to the 20s, and now we're into the teens. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about public authority, flexibilities, and governance. How are we doing? Good, all right. So there's a lot that was in the governor's budget. I've talked to a lot of reporters, and I think that most people believe that large portions of this public authority are probably dead in the water. And that's to quote almost verbatim one of the legislators that's out there. Ray Cross has disagreed. He says that there's still a lot of places that flexibilities in public authority can be applied, even without separating the UW system from state authority, which is one of the biggest things. Reporter asked me about where it was at, and it's above my pay grade to speculate on what's going to happen in Madison. I think I said this should be sausage making at its best, and I said that this budget, if it could be described as anything, was quite ambitious, because the amount of stuff that is in this is unbelievable. There's so much change, and there's so many unknowns, and it's all done in such a short period of time, which is unbelievable. 6 areas that I want to talk about. Shared governance, getting probably most of the focus. I was talking to Elizabeth right before this. Shared governance is getting a lot of the focus, and tenure. They're not the same thing. But it's getting a whole lot of attention. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what it means to be separate from state statutes. I'm going to talk about flexibilities, good positive flexibilities in procurement and in pay plans. I'm going to talk about this dedicated funding stream and what that means. I'm going to talk about the ability to set tuition. And finally, I'm going to give you very nebulously kind of an overview on this authority for the capital building projects, because that's really where there's a lot of lack of definition that really needs to be really examined and looked at. So, shared governance and tenure. What this does primarily is it removes the UW system from state statute. 3609, which is the statute that guides shared governance, is contained within state statute. You can't be in state statute and maintain 3609. So there was a lot of concern. And what shared governance is it gives our students, our faculty, our staff, both classified and academic, the right, the ability to have a voice in policies and procedures that impact them. The students, a little bit different, gives them absolute control over those allocable or fees that are primarily spent on activities and things under the SSA. So that's primarily what this does. Shared governance is in state statute 3609, and there was a concern that if this state statute goes away, what's going to replace it? And people pointed out the fact that the first thing's going to happen is that the statute's going to go away. And we're not going to have anything to be able to build in to guide it. So for a period of time, and we don't know how long that is, there is going to be, rightfully, no shared governance document that's out there. The Board of Regents, they recognized this as an issue, and at the last meeting, they essentially did this. They said in a Board of Regent resolution that they would take the exact language that is in 3609 and they would bring it into board policy. So let me kind of read this. Shared governance and tenure would be managed by the Board of Regents instead of the state through board policy rather than the legislature through statute. The Regents unanimously supported a resolution that the board shall have authority to establish policies of shared governance and tenure if the legislature adopts proposals to remove these from statute. In addition, if the legislature adopts the governor's proposal to remove shared governance and tenure from statutes earlier than July 1, 2016, the Regents' resolution also called for the board to adopt policies on shared governance and tenure that reflect, this is right from the board document, the exact language of the current statutory law. And this is a quote from Mike Falbo that just says, if shared governance and tenure are going to be removed from state law, I believe that we should take the opportunity to create solid policy statements in those two areas that are fundamental to the UW system. Currently, there are two committees, one on shared governance and one on tenure, that are really talking about these things. We have a representative on that. It is Lopa? Yeah, I think so. A faculty member, and this is really the change for shared governance. Shared governance is a little bit different from tenure because shared governance, as I've worked at a couple of institutions, is somewhat more unique in having it in state statute in Wisconsin than any other place. Tenure is across the board in most institutions. It comes out of the AAUP statement of 1940, and it's ingrained at almost every campus. And shared governance protects tenure. which is why it's in that whole 3609. The tenure is not shared governance. Tenure actually came out of that 1940 statement. It was established to protect academic freedom back in the time where faculty were really concerned about getting up in front of a classroom, speaking their voice, and having those comments given in an academic classroom taken against them. And so that's the whole creation of tenure, if you want a 30-second history lesson. And there's going to be quite a bit of public debate. I run into colleagues of mine all of the time. They can understand shared governance, but don't agree or don't like this idea of tenure and protected employment status. I'm not making a judgment statement on this, but I'm telling you that is one of the reasons why this has become such a hot topic of political debate, because tenure has really kind of taken the front row attention from some of the things that are in this governor's budget that I wish we were talking about instead. And that's mine. The separation of state authority and statute has some other items of note. The Board of Regents, we now negotiate Minnesota reciprocity. It used to be through the Higher Education Aids Board. It would be given to us. We would collect the money back and forth from Minnesota. That becomes one of our abilities to manage that. Municipal services, this is a negative. The state usually came in and covered municipal services for the city of Menominee. We would then need to pay for that. uw-system would pay for it. uw-system would bill us. So it's another budget cut that's really not being reflected truly in what our cut number at $300 million is. This is in addition to that. And then one of the big ones, and one of the things that got a lot of discussion at the Board of Regents, is that sovereign immunity goes away. What is sovereign immunity? I think translated it's that you can't sue the king. But in this case what it is that since we're a part of the state of Wisconsin, we're outside really of lawsuits. And if we are a public authority, we as an institution and individuals are subject to lawsuits, and they don't know what that will cost in terms of being able to protect us from legal, to protect us legally. There are some advantages in procurement, flexibilities, and in compensation. The uw-system would create our own system. Oh, the uw-system creates our own procurement system, is what that ought to say. So right now we buy from state contract. And the state, through the Department of Administration, they establish contracts with the state, and we have to purchase off of those. Some of the things that that governs is printing. There's reams of printing rules and regulations. We could do it cheaper if we didn't have to follow that. Telecommunications, we would have to buy from AT&T when VoIP is much less expensive. We have to get fleet vehicles through the state. We could go out on enterprise contracts. We could negotiate the cost of those outside of, with the exception of the Big Ten contract. We would be able to negotiate those things. So the ability for us to sit down with vendors ourselves as a uw-system gives us quite a bit of negotiating power to drive the best price. And so this procurement flexibility is a big thing that system and Ray Cross is really interested in. And compensation and pay plans. We have 3 different employee classifications on the campus. Not all of them can receive merit pay. And when we do merit compensation and pay increases across, they're usually done through the state. This would create our own separate compensation program. It would allow us some flexibility in establishing rules, and our classified staff would then become municipal staff. We develop our own employment policies. We would need to create employment handbooks, and we would need to establish, in some cases, merit pay on the basis that underlies that. The dedicated funding stream. I heard this, I was at a meeting where there was a legislator and a couple folks in the room, and they said something along the line of, we should freeze your tuition because you're sitting on all of these reserve balances. Of course, $1 billion worth of reserves. I won't get too far into the differences in reserve balances across other institutions. I wish ours were bigger, and I can understand why institutions would want to have reserves. And that is because having an idea of what your revenue is going to be 48 months and beyond is impossible in the state of Wisconsin. Every year, we don't know what our tuition revenue is going to be because the legislature sets our tuition revenue. For a while, it was very static at 5%. Now it's static at 0%, and there's even a comment that it's going to be frozen or capped at least 3 years out. At the same time, when we were raising tuition at 5%, the state was reducing support on the other end. So I will say this, 75% of our budget is in personnel costs. The UW has not had a pay plan that's been above 1% in at least 10 years. I've been here myself 8 years. There's been 2 1%. There was pay frozen for 5 years that I was here. And not only that, you can mix that in with furloughs and the increase in benefits. So if 70% of our budget is in personnel and tuition was being increased at 5% year in and year out, what happened to that money? Well, some of it was balances, but other was paying for the reductions that we have grown accustomed to every biennium. Every biennium dating back to 1978 has had some sort of reduction. So to plan for the reductions, my colleagues, not Stout, were building these balances. And the balances would go away when there was some sort of stability in what the revenue was going to be. And the only way you can have stability in revenue is to have a dedicated funding stream. The dedicated funding stream would work something like this. It would be a percentage of the sales tax. What percentage? I don't know. And this was one of the things that still needs to be worked out. What we would hope is you would take the entire UW system GPR allocation and you would back it into a sales percentage and then mark that off as a dedicated funding stream. What that allows is for people like us to be able to plan beyond 48 months. If I can't plan beyond 48 months, how can we do capital programs? How can we address deferred maintenance? How can we look at compensation programs? How can we build academic programs? You can't. You can only plan on 48 months, and then you can only plan on what you know, which is that we've always had reductions, and now we have capped tuition. So the statement was that balances can decrease, but it hinges on visibility to revenue. So the balances exist because we don't know at the end of the day how much money we're going to have in these accounts. I love this quote. Ray Cross was at UW Green Bay, and he was doing some of the open forums that he's doing across the UW system. And he said, tuition shouldn't be a political process. I don't believe tuition increases should be a political process. I believe that it should be a rational process that includes what is the cost of offering the program? What is the market for it? What are our competitors doing? What is the need of the state? If the state has a really big need in that area, maybe we can reduce tuition in that program in order to encourage students to go into that field. And finally, you have affordability. I mean, that is one of the considerations, because affordability is an issue. These 4 factors, and I counted them up, there's actually, I think, 5 there, have to play into the rational process. So when the legislature intervenes and says we're going to put a cap on that, we're not going to let you raise tuition, that's an arbitrary number. There's not a basis for that. It would be like saying that the cost of a gallon of gasoline is too much, and then we need to cap that because it's too expensive. Well, most people would say, well, you can't cap a gallon of gasoline. It's driven by market forces, right? So are universities. So I was asked by one of the reporters, in 3 years, will tuition go up? And I said, yeah, I think they will. Well, what's that based on? And I said, well, if I look out 3 years from now, believe that commodities will increase, that minimum wage will increase, that insurance will increase, that health care will increase. All of these things will increase, which will put an increase on my costs. And if I have to back my costs into revenue, the revenue's got to go up. So when you say in 3 years that you're going to cap tuition based on an arbitrary number, it's why the balances are there to begin with. Finally, changes to the capital planning process. And this is my last slide. I'm doing well. Okay. So there are so many changes in capital planning. And there are 2 places where we pull revenue for building projects. First is from program revenue. Those are buildings that students build by their fees and by the revenue that's brought into them. So the residence halls that are put up, the only people paying for a residence hall are people that live in residence halls. And then that bonding, that borrowing, is built into the rate that is charged to the student in that housing. Same thing with dining. Parking lots are a little bit more challenging because of the market, but the same thing. Student centers, rec centers, that's spread throughout all student seg fees. And if you come to campus, you just have a $400 charge in your tuition that pays for the use and the enjoyment of this building. So that is program revenue. It doesn't cost the state anything. They do have to borrow those dollars, and we then pay back that bond. The state's borrowing, but we hold the debt. Darren holds the debt for the student center bonds. The state is not on the hook for it. But the intention of the legislature is to get that bonding lowered. And so in that attempt to get bonding lowered, one of the things is that we cannot borrow from the state anymore. They want us to go out into the private market, and many universities do this. They open up and offer municipal bond offerings, where you might, as an investor, buy into the University of Wisconsin's football stadium municipal bond, and it's going to pay about 6% over 20 years, and you can help out a university, and you can bond a building. That's where the legislature would like to go. And the reason that they like to do that is that the lower amount that they borrow, the higher amount that their credit rating is going to be by Moody's or S&P, and if they can raise their rating, the credit, the interest that they pay is going to drop. Okay, but it really puts us into a bind because there are a whole number of student-centered projects that are in the queue that are ready to be built that don't have any bonding authority to move through. And so one of the things that that the capital planning process does is that UW system will not bond through the state. That's only the program revenue side of it. The general program revenue side are the buildings like Harvey and Jarvis and our academic buildings that have been state supported. This is really surprising. This budget, which normally would have about $200 million in new building dollars that would be put up at various UW campuses, has no money. Zero. There are no buildings. Not only is there a $300 million reduction, but there's a $200 million amount of money that usually was given to the state to build buildings. And they are bringing all of the buildings that have been delayed over the 13-15 biennium into the 15-17 biennium to be built. So builders will keep working. But the 17-19 biennium will be very interesting because that's when you'll see the gap. So even if public authority does not get changed, I believe that the hole in the building programs will remain. There's another interesting thing in there about the UW system and the campuses leasing our buildings from the state. So it removes us from needing to go to the Department of Administration and the Department of DFD, the Department of Facilities Development. Thank you, Darren. We normally went through them. They managed our projects. They charged us 4% of our program costs, but they managed our projects. So they had a consistent group of people that served as the PM, the project manager, that would come in and they would work with the contractors to make sure that this was right, that this was to code, that this was to state specs, and they did that. The good news was that was a nice service. The bad news is this took a very, very long time and it was expensive. So if you look at the average cost of construction per square foot, a metric that's used all over the place, you'll see that the cost of building things in Wisconsin is much higher than other places, and it takes probably twice as long. So one of the good things about this is that you don't have to go through the Department of Administration to get these. But it does leave a gap in the fact that somebody's going to need to be that project manager, and that there's going to be a cost for that. That's undefined. And that as we build things on state property, state owns the land that we have it, we then lease that back from the state. There's no costs that are in that document that are associated with what that lease number is. So that's an unknown. These projects have to go through the State Building Commission, but the ceilings of where you need to get approval and where you do not need to get approval has lessened. And then buildings prior to a certain period of time, the state could just sell those. So there's a lot of things that were built into this capital planning process. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this either. It's very complicated. But it's probably, of all of the things that I've been concerned about in this governor's budget process, these capital building program changes are huge. They're sizable. So, thank you. I appreciate your attention, and I guess I got 10 minutes. I'd be willing to answer any questions if you have. Yeah, Darren.
You've talked about it, and our chance to talk about it, so we talked about focus is a stable funding source, that being sales tax. And I think you talked about with the state government, that number does stay fairly stable no matter what the economic outlook of the state is. People have to buy stuff. But also in the governor's proposal, and based on, I use the legislative history of those numbers because I think they're probably the best numbers you can get. In the governor's proposal at 17, so that stable funding source through retail sales tax there at 53-55 million. My math says that's another 90 million lower than the $300 million cut we're facing now. So while it may be stable, I don't know if being even poorer than 1998 funding levels is such a great thing. And how do you deal with that?
It's a great question. I think a lot of the wind was taken out of one of the criticisms of giving the UW the ability to price its product is that, and one of the questions a reporter asked me is, if you're given the authority to raise tuition and have a stable funding stream, you'll just jack up tuition. you'll just raise it to what you need. I think that's wrong. I think that like a market-based economy, you have to, I think it puts much more authority and much more accountability onto the institution. Because as Ray Cross was saying, we need to look at our programs, we need to look at our competitors, we need to see what market demand is. If a program isn't pulling people in, either the program doesn't have interest or we have a price not accordingly. So we are now subject to the fluctuations in price sensitivity of the market. Prior to coming here, I worked at a private institution that was one of those 18%. They charged 30 grand. We had a program for early childhood. And the numbers in early childhood, it was St. Louis University's. But our early childhood program, the numbers kept going down and down and down and down and down. And we had great faculty, it was a good program. We had a whole internship with this place called the New School, which was, it was a great program. So why could we not fill the people, why could we not fill the chairs? Well, you know what the salary of an early childhood development person is? It's about $30,000. So we're charging $30,000 a year over a 4 or 5 year period of time to give somebody a degree that they're going to go out and earn about $30,000. So they're going to walk away with this $120,000 in student loan, and they're not going to have the ability to pay down the cost of the program. Even though it was a great program, and we even started doing what private institutions do. We tuition discounted. So at private institutions, and it's one of the things you won't see in the chart, you might have a $30,000 price tag out there, but that's not what people pay. There's a 40% buy down of the $30,000 tuition that is the average. If you're coming in at a private institution with a 30 ACT and a 3.8, you're going to pay about 25% of that price tag, not $30,000. If you're coming in with a 2019 ACT and a C average, you're going to pay the full price. And so that's how those institutions average that out. So even St. Louis University tried to discount it by making it more reasonable, but it still was a $30,000 year-in cost for a program that could support that. I think, to answer your question, that the funding stream gives you the base to be able to evaluate where you're at economically with your competitors in your market and your programs, to be able to get some sense of what a program ought to cost. And that's what we're doing with the CI. And we are looking at CI, and we have programs that are priced differently all over the place in CI. If it's a high demand, high salary program, we're charging a different price than if it's a low demand or low enrollment program, because we know that it's economics, there's supply and demand, and we've matched that to the demand curve. So it is lower, but being able to be more predictive, more thoughtful, to be able to plan out more than 48 months, I think that I can make up that 90 million. If they don't, well, and they're going to break that across. 90 million would be 40% of 90 million for us. If that funding stream was real. So one of the questions I've had is, well, the state, by just legislative authority, could change that funding stream at any time too. So that kind of takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails. Well, but they wouldn't do that. If they give us tuition pricing authority, but it comes with a cap, that takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails too. And to not be able to price by a program even takes further wind out of the sails, which makes it a whole lot less attractive when you start to look at it from
Well, I think you added the capital aspect. that the university would be on the hook for, that's, could be a real mess, and then again, you've got a problem.
Well, and we have never had to account for, because the state has funded it from a different place, our deferred maintenance. So at an institution where we didn't have the state coming in annually with $200,000, you as an accountant, because if we need to get municipal bonds, we need to open up our books completely to Moody's and S&P to be able to get a decent interest rate. So one of the things they're going to want to look at is, well, what's your backlog of deferred maintenance? And if we're not getting deferred maintenance covered by the state buildings program, then that is another negative to the whole thing. So now I think I'm over. Where are my numbers?
No, right about,
Oh.
right about now.
Oh, fuck, less than.
If there's no other questions for Ms. Williams, then we will hear from our next speaker. We have a student speaker, Anthony is it Kaufman?
Yes.
Kaufman? Anthony Kaufman, who's going to give a brief presentation from the student perspective.
All right, well, I think Vice Chancellor Lyons gave a pretty good explanation of all the numbers and policy involved, so I won't harp more on that. I think he's covered it great. So what I want to talk about is, what does that all mean for student experience, and what can you do about it? So one of the things I think Chancellor Lyons did mention, I wasn't expecting to mention, was 3609, the shared governance. That's something that is very important. I know it's may, he kind of said it was something that may not even happen, but even the fact that it's present in the governor's budget is something very worrisome to not only student government, which should be worrisome to you as a student as a whole. It's important for not only students, but all staff at the university, for us having a voice, and an actual legal voice in the state, in these institutions. Moving it outside of state statute really reduces legal recourse that we have to actually have our voices heard. So the removal of that would be very concerning. Hopefully it doesn't, but that's something that is an express concern for students. In terms of general budgetary experience, in terms of the budget and the reduction of funding, I know that the administration is doing their best to make sure the student experience is not negatively affected. I believe that was their number one principle, in fact, when they were looking on the strategic planning group for their reduction. However, it does not mean it will not be affected. It's going to be affected. You're going to have reduced staffing, reduced services. That's going to mean larger class sizes. It's going to mean reduced class offerings. You're going to be able to not necessarily take what you want to take. You're going to have upper level classes not offered as frequently. You're going to have lower level classes with much larger class sizes, and maybe not at times that are as convenient to your schedule. And you're going to have issues potentially graduating at an expeditious rate. With also reduction in other student services, you're going to have less, like counseling services, all sorts of services that you don't necessarily view as part of your education, but are necessary for your positive experience on campus, which is a very important aspect too. It's really easy to just take these cuts and be like, well, we're going to just shift it off to people who aren't essential, but it's not. Everyone on this campus is an essential employee in that aspect. Everyone from janitorial to utility services to teachers to academic staff, they're all together here to make student experience what it is. And any reduction in any one of those areas will negatively affect all students. So what can you do about these cuts? Honestly, awareness and advocacy. You're all here at this event. That shows that you're interested in being aware. You notice there's a lot of empty seats. What can you do about that? You can talk to people. You can talk to your other students. You can talk to other adults. That's important. I mean, everyone in the state is a voting member if they're over 18. So if you value education, talk to people about how you value that, and try to get civic awareness for education. Coming to these events is great, but having others brought to these events, talking to them about these issues, making them aware. I know I just heard a student today talking about how if fees go up much more in her art classes, she won't be able to afford working the summer to pay for that. And I know that I've seen personally in student government, that's something that very well could happen. And I feel like a lot of students aren't really aware that these cuts, these increases will happen because of these cuts until it actually happens. And as a social science major, it's a lot easier to change something before, like, to stop something from ever changing than it is to change something that has already happened. So once it happens, you have to go through the entire process again. And you're looking at extensive like policy wrangling, and it's a lot easier to just be aware and stop it from happening in the first place. So will tuition probably rise in 2 years if it's let? Yeah. And will students complain? Yes. But if they act now, if they talk about it now, you can reduce that. It's a lot easier to be proactive about these cuts than it is to be reactive to when they actually happen. So really just talking to your friends, talking to people in the community, talking to people you aren't friends with even, really making campus awareness available. I know we have these events today. Tomorrow we'll be going to Madison, bringing students on to Madison, be demonstrating at the Capitol, meeting with legislators, with other students from other UW campuses. If you're not going, we'll have sign up available after here. And then I'm sure we'll have other events as this budget process continues. It's important to just stay informed and help the campus as a whole become more informed. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. That concludes the program for today. If you are able, oh, yes.
I just want to say that Sheila Harsdorf is a senator on the Joint Finance Committee. Powerful committee. Have you guys written to her?
Yes.
You know, do you talk with her? She covers this university. Make sure your voices are heard with that. The other thing is, thank you for saying that everybody is important. The custodians were in here probably a week and a half ago now, and being talked to about how they're going to be cleaning more. Through the APPA benchmarks, you know, this campus will be classed as dingy to unkept. Who wants to live in dingy to unkept? And we need to really think, when we talk about money, where is it going and where is it coming from? You know, we don't, in Wisconsin, we have not accepted that federal funding for Medicaid. Can you talk to your legislators about that? You have an issue, but everything interconnects so much that, and we can't all learn it in a day. But thank you for coming and taking part of this, I guess, because there are just so many interwoven things to this. So go to Madison tomorrow.
Thank you for your input. Appreciate it. If you are able to stay and make a video recorded statement, we'll take that to Madison around the end of the month, or a written statement. You can leave that with us as well. Or if you want to take a postcard and send that to your legislator, that's we encourage you to do that as well. So just see us we'll be at the back desk or the back table there on the way out. Thank you for coming.